All right, let's talk about something that literally every single one of us does. It's this little mental shortcut, this psychological quirk that totally shapes how we see our wins and our losses. And most of the time, we don't even have a clue it's happening.
I mean, seriously, we've all been there. You nail that big presentation, and you're thinking, yep, that was all me, pure skill. But if you bomb it, ugh, the projector was acting up, or my team didn't give me the right data. That feeling? That's not just you being weird. It's actually a core piece of how our brains are wired.
So this whole thing, this pattern of taking all the credit and, pointing the finger when things go south, it actually has a name. It's a classic cognitive bias, and it has a huge impact on how we see ourselves and everything around us. And here it is. We call it the self-serving bias. The best way to think about it? It's like your brain's default setting for explaining what happens in your life. It's a shortcut that, almost without thinking, filters everything to make sure you come out looking as good as possible.
So why? Why do our brains do this? Well, the answer is pretty simple, really. It feels good. It's basically a defense mechanism, a little bodyguard for our ego. When things go our way, bam, instant self-esteem boost. And when they don't, this bias jumps in like a shield to keep our self-worth from getting bruised.
So the core mechanic is super straightforward. It really just splits into two paths. When you succeed, you look inside yourself. I worked hard for this. I'm good at this. But when you fail, your eyes look outward. The instructions were confusing, or my boss is just impossible to please. It's a really simple but incredibly powerful mental habit that's running in the background almost all the time.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into this ego bodyguard. Why is it so baked into our way of thinking? What's really driving this thing on a psychological level?
Well, psychologists usually point to two big motivations here. The first one is called self-enhancement. It's pretty much what it sounds like. We're just hardwired to want to feel good about ourselves. The second is self-presentation. This is all about how we look to other people. We want to be seen as smart, capable, and successful. So, the self-serving bias is a perfect tool for managing that public image.
And this idea isn't new at all. Researchers were getting into this way back in the 60s and 70s. There was this really key study in 1975 by Miller and Ross that put a fascinating spin on it. They said, hey, maybe it's not just about ego. They argued it could be a totally rational process. Think about it. We usually expect to succeed, so when we do, it makes sense to attribute it to ourselves. But failure? That's unexpected, so it feels like it must have come from somewhere else. And what's really cool is that today, with modern tech, we can literally watch this happening inside the brain.
Okay, so where does this bias actually show up in the real world? The short answer? Pretty much everywhere. Let's run through a few classic examples.
Let's go back to that classroom example from the beginning. The student who fails, they're pointing a finger at the unfair teacher. But what about the teacher? They're probably thinking the student just didn't try hard enough. See what's happening? Both of them are using this bias to protect their own sense of competence. And you can just imagine how easily that leads to conflict.
This happens all the time at work, too. It's a classic. You get that big promotion? Well, obviously you earned it. You get passed over? Oh, it's just office politics, or the boss has favorites. It even gets more serious, like in studies of workplace accidents. The person who got hurt tends to blame things like faulty equipment, while their coworkers might be more likely to blame the person's own carelessness.
And sports. Sports are a perfect showcase for this. One analysis looked at what teams said in the sports pages. And get this, winning teams gave themselves credit, for their skill and teamwork, about 75% of the time. But the losing teams, they only pointed inward about half the time. The rest, it was all about bad referee calls, terrible weather, or just plain old bad luck.
It even creeps into our closest relationships. Some studies looking at romantic couples, for instance, found that men might be a bit more likely to blame their partners for negative stuff that happens between them. It's a really subtle thing, but it can be a super powerful force in how we see disagreements.
Okay, so if this bias is everywhere, does that mean it affects all of us in the exact same way? Well, no, not really. Turns out there are a few key factors that can dial this bias up or down for different people.
And culture is a huge one. In more individualistic cultures, like in the US, there's a huge emphasis on personal success and achievement. So the need to protect your own ego is really strong, which makes the bias stronger too. But in more collectivistic cultures, say like Japan, the focus is more on the group, on harmony. And that social focus tends to tone down this "it's all about me" kind of bias.
Your personality type also plays a big part, especially something psychologists call your locus of control. Now, if you have an internal locus of control, you're someone who believes you're the captain of your own ship. You make things happen. But here's the interesting part. People with an external locus of control, those who feel like life is mostly determined by outside forces, they are often more likely to show this bias after they fail. It just fits their worldview perfectly, right? Well, of course I failed. Things just happen to me. But check out this fascinating twist. It turns out that a lack of this bias is actually linked to some mental health issues, specifically depression. People who are clinically depressed often do the exact opposite. They'll chalk up their successes to pure luck, but when they fail, they blame themselves and only themselves for everything. So just knowing this bias exists is the first huge step toward maybe spotting it in yourself. And what's amazing is that we're moving beyond just theory. Thanks to modern science, we can actually peek inside the brain and see what's going on when this bias takes over.
Yeah, with neuroscience today, we're not just guessing anymore. We can look under the hood and see the actual brain processes that drive this behavior.
And what researchers are finding is just incredible. This isn't just some abstract idea, it's a physical process. Using tools like fMRI, they can see that when we make one of these self-serving judgments, the motivation and reward centers of our brain just light right up. What's even crazier? EEG research suggests that this is our brain's lazy path. It literally takes less mental effort, less self-control to blame someone else than it does to stop and take an honest look in the mirror.
So at the end of the day, it's important to remember that the self-serving bias isn't some kind of character flaw. It's not about being a bad person. It's just a fundamental, deeply human trait. It's an automatic and honestly a pretty efficient way our minds protect our self-esteem while we try to navigate the constant ups and downs of life.
And that really is the ultimate challenge, isn't it? It's so easy to see it in other people. You can hear your friend blame the controller for losing a video game and just roll your eyes. But seeing it in yourself, recognizing it in the moment, that's a whole different ballgame. Now that you know what it is, I wonder, can you see it in yourself?